Welcome to the Iowa blog. I am your host, Craig Wynn, and this handsome fellow, of course, is Wookie. We're here to bring you the second episode of Chakmah Choter. Chakmah is the Hebrew word for wise, and according to the King of Kings, the returning King, our Savior, this Son of God, and the Messiah, so he's in a position where he ought to know, the Choter is Chakmah, as is his wife, according to the great king. We were considering the fourth statement, actually the third statement of Dode's Ode to the Choter, his introduction to the concept of providing a choter for his people in our previous program. And so we're going to continue with that statement. It reads, against the mouths and the pronouncements, pay, upon the speech in the here and now at the end of the stupidity and stubbornness and corruptness, the simpletons, particularly, and one individual in particular who is beguiling a group of idiots, all who fail to comprehend, of the ignorant and irrational that are mocking the truth by promoting deceptions. A choter, the rod of divine justice, a stem off the main branch, a productive sucker from the fallen trunk. A choter will rise and he will roar, triumphantly opposing while agitating. And so the language of the one who learns, who comes to understand, and then teaches will focus on what he observes. Mashal, word picture, Proverbs 14:3. 3,000 years ago, a king who was a prophet introduced his people to the concept of a choter. It is rather surprising, then, considering his notoriety, considering that the 14th Mashal proverb has been part of the lore of his people and of his acclaim for all of these 3,000 years, since it is included in the most widely published and distributed book of all time, that not a person on earth, not over the entire 3,000 years, recognized that Dode was speaking of the arrival of a person who would operate under the title choter. Well, that's not completely true, because there was one other. His name is Yashayah, the great prophet of whom we have the entire scroll called the Great Isaiah Scroll. He devoted what is now called the 11th chapter of his prophetic testimony to the same individual, the choter. Now, it's kind of interesting that these would be the two men who would speak of this man, and the only two that would speak of him, and that they would be separated by some 300 years, although no one spoke more effectively, more eloquently, more even prophetically of David than did Yashayah. And there is something that they share in common, and that thing is that among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the treasures that have been safely stored for our eyes to see, directly beneath Jerusalem and above the Dead Sea, that the largest repository of scrolls comprise the Psalms and Proverbs that were written by Dode. And second unto them are the prophetic revelations of one Yashayah. There are more of both of them even than there are Torah scrolls. And that really shouldn't be surprising. And it is so because, well, Moshe revealed God's narrative about creation, the garden, the flood, the story of how the covenant was manifest with Abraham and Sarah, and how their relationship grew into the children of Israel, and how they put themselves in harm's way, and how God heard their cry and rescued them through this exodus, and then presented the merit of his mikre, the invitations to meet and to be welcomed into his presence, detailing the horrors of God's people's behavior all the way along during the exodus, and then as they enter finally the promised land. And while that narrative is essential and beloved, filled with guidance and teaching, as the word Torah actually means, those are words on a page. Dowd was the flesh and blood of the Torah. He is the living manifestation of the Torah. He is actually the Word made flesh. He is the man who walked out of what Moshe had said and had written to embody all that Israel represents, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly, as well as the man who made the covenant possible. The covenant was established according to Yahweh through Dowd. And so we should not be surprised that Dowd's lives as Messiah and King, as the Lamb and our Savior, as the returning Shepherd and King, are all documented so beautifully throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that the man who helped us understand his life and how Dowd would be reintroduced to his people, how that story of Dowd would be played out such that finally in the end, after some 3,000 years, what Dowd conveyed to us would be appreciated, that he volunteered to serve as the Passover lamb, perfecting the covenant family on matzah, and then signing our adoption papers so we could be enriched and empowered, inheriting all God has to give on Bikurim. But the treatise that was developed after this introduction to the Choter by Yashaya is the textbook on how to perform in this role that Dowd is the first to introduce. But it is rather amazing that a title that had never even been considered prior to me coming upon it, as I was writing a book called Observations. You'll see it on the shelf behind me. There's 5 volumes of it. And in that book, we began with one of Dowd's mashal. I believe it was the 6th. And I presented the 6th and the 7th mashal because they speak so poignantly of what Dowd would achieve for us and how Christianity would corrupt it and how his own people would malign it. And it speaks in those of a particularly malicious woman that I wanted to pursue through the great prophet Yashaya. So after we jumped out of translating some of Dowd's early mashal in this regard, the commitment was to go through and present Yashaya, very long book. And as I was doing that, finished through the 10th chapter and into the 11th, all of a sudden now I'm introduced to this lone man that is bequeathed with the 7 spirits of Yahweh, such that this is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever occurred previously. And you're reading this and it's, you go, why is no one talking about this Choter? Particularly when this individual represents everything that is important in the last days. He is the person who writes the books that Yahweh lifts up so that you can, well, know the truth about God. And it is genuinely essential. And so during that time, and you're reading Choter, and you say, well, this is really an important term. I need to understand what it means. And you go back into the 10th chapter, and it explains that, yes, this Choter is both a rod of divine judgment and also a stem off the original branch, even a sucker off the old rootstock that gives it new life. All of these things are presented within Yashayah, but due diligence requires that you go and return to the first time Choter is used. And you find that it's not just a first time, and only other time. And that means it was written 300 years earlier by Dode. That's who introduced us to the Choter. And that's what we're reading right here. So against the mouths and the pronouncements of the stupidly stubborn and corrupt, a Choter. Now, that's pretty clear. That tells you that it is the Choter that is his responsibility is to protest, to oppose the pronouncements of those who are stupid, stubborn, and corrupt, the simpletons who beguile, this group of idiots who don't comprehend, the ignorant, the irrational, those mocking the truth, those promoting deceptions. Boy, it's as if he looked over my shoulder this morning and said, well, welcome to X. It's filled with idiots. And, occasionally we even get numbskulls into our family here and Facebook. And boy, did we ever get them into our inner circle. Not once, but twice, although both were involved the same individual. I guess fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. Or fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, is the line. I couldn't even get my own line straight there. But nonetheless, that's what happened. And that's why this pronouncement on the Choter opens speaking of a woman who imbues everything that is associated with wisdom, intelligence, understanding, being thoughtful. The woman that I met online who read my books and with whom I exchanged hundreds upon hundreds of emails over a 10-year period before we even met. Living embodiment of Chakmah. Being opposed by an exceedingly evil woman, conniving, psychotic. Ewil is the word in Hebrew, which is the word right here for stupidly stubborn and corrupt. A simpleton who beguiles. A class A idiot. Ewil. In Hebrew, the basis of evil in English. And so into that context is where this Choter has been established. It is my job to oppose them. And in this case, this evil woman came from a conspiracy cult. Did the same thing. They claimed my words as their own. And promoted all manner of absurdities. That cult was a little more political in its conspiracies. This one is more religious in its conspiracies. This one, of course, going back to the basis of religion in Babylon with a Mother of God, Queen of Heaven, Mommy Dearest cult. And it is the Choter's job to oppose these things. So, there are I'm sure many of you who, well, not many of you would say it, I don't think, but that have over the years complained. Well, by the way, we have set up a complaint box. It's a courtesy of King Dode and Nabi Yashaya, courtesy of Yahweh in Shamaim, where all criticisms can be duly filed, received, processed, and resolved. So, got a criticism, you know where to send it. But it, it it is the job of the Choter to be argumentative. That's my job. I cannot suffer fools well and do this job. Dode couldn't either, nor could Yeshaya, and nor does Yahweh. That's why I say if you got a complaint, take it up with them. 1-800 Yahweh. So, the bottom line here is that the job is to be opposed to those who are wrong. To emphasize this, there's not many people that have a full appreciation of why I spent the first 3 years of this relationship involved in a singular task. At Yahweh's request, he asked me to begin by exposing and condemning Islam, which I did through Tea with Terrorists and then Prophet of Doom, and now through the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion. And our next thing on our agenda, after translating the book of Hosea and understanding God's timeline and divorce and his great hatred of religion, the consequence of religion, was to write a book called, at the time, Questioning Paul, and now renamed through the 5 volumes of Twistianity, to expose and condemn Christianity, comparing the Christian statements in the New Testament to what God actually said, to prove that the Christian New Testament is pure trash. And I did the same thing with the Quran, although with the Quran it's more, well, I'm not sure it is really any more entertaining. Both books are actually hilarious. If you read them, there's a great sense of humor that goes throughout them. Matter of fact, for us today, for those listening to this program, you'll know that today we finally dropped the Great Siratan Challenge. It is my rap song to Allah's challenge. They said that no one could out Siratan him. Oh, really? And I want to tell you, nailed it. Won the Siratan Challenge. I have my gold star and seal of approval. You'll find it prominently now posted both on X. I'm sure it's now posted, will be soon, on YouTube. And of course, it is in our family home on Facebook. So, yeah, there's some humor that goes into this as well. Religion is, well, if it wasn't so evil, it would be funny. The things people believe. I was looking at a post on my feed into Facebook this morning, and of this person that published a picture of crucifixion. They just love their dead God on a stick. And then of a empty tomb that is filled with light. And it says, absolute proof in his death that he was fully man. And absolute proof in his resurrection that he was fully God. Just think of that for a moment. That means your God can't be any bigger than a man. A dead man on a stick, as a matter of fact. A man that you can put in a rock tomb. A God you can lock up in a rock tomb. Oh, but he's really a special man God because he could roll away the stone in front of the tomb. That makes him really God. If your God is so damn small that he's about my size, you don't have much of a God. If your God is so anemic that, as you claim, Jews killed him, then maybe you're worshiping the wrong thing. This notion that Jesus, who, by the way, never existed, nothing but a crude counterfeit and myth, was God, is so ludicrous. I mean, this is the kinds of pronouncements of the stupid, evil simpletons that beguile we need to be condemning because, well, if he was God, why didn't he ever say God's name? If he was God, then why didn't he write anything down? Because that's God's style. He wrote everything down. If he's God, why didn't he speak Hebrew? Why didn't he write in Hebrew? Why didn't he leave a lasting legacy for us? If he was God, then why does his statements contradict the statements of God? If he was God, why is he represented by a man who claimed to be demon possessed, who claimed by his own admission that he was a sexual pervert, who said that he was a mass murderer, by a man who claimed that he was the bestest of the rabbis, even when the myth condemns the rabbis? I mean, it's so preposterously stupid. You want to pretend that your Jeebus is God, and yet he didn't write a word down? And you're reliant on nincompoops like Paul that were stunningly irrational, contradictory? And Paul's premise is God couldn't save anyone. Torah can't save, the prophets can't save, God can't save anyone. If you rely on what God had to say, you're dead. Matter of fact, if you're circumcised, nothing can save you, even though that's the sign of the covenant. The Torah is incapable of saving anyone. All it can do is condemn. So, because God realized, boy, I must be a total failure at all of this. In fact, I don't even know my son's name. I thought it was Dode. I thought Dode was the Messiah. I thought Dode was the Savior. I thought Dode was the king. But evidently, I am really as old as he says I am. So, gee, gosh, Willie, I think I need this mass murdering, demon possessed, sexual pervert who's got the IQ of a gnat to misappropriate and misquote everything I have said and to twist it to demonstrate that I'm incompetent and I can't save anyone, but he, the murderer, is going to be your savior. And then he's going to introduce to you a counterfeit of the fellow I thought was my son because I said so 3 times, Dode. The fellow I thought was the Messiah because I called him the Messiah 3 times, Dode. The fellow I said was the returning king, at least I thought so because I wrote about it regularly. But, then again, Paul says I'm stupid. Paul says I can't do anything. I'm impotent. So maybe Paul's right, huh? That's your religion. And you want that rubbish to be fully God? If that's your God's not a whole hell of a lot better than a rat. Really? Well, I guess at least it's not a snake, so it's not Allah, but that is what Allah Akbar means, by the way, is Allah's a rat, but maybe we've found something here. What do snakes eat, by the way? Rats. What are Muslims, who are Muslims killing? Okay, so here we are. The Choter's job is to do as I'm doing. Speak out against the pronouncements and the stupidity of the stubborn and corrupt. And because this began with the evil woman, and because this evil woman is the one that is running this mother goddess cult now that stole people who were very productive in the conveyance of this message, and some who were not all that productive, but nonetheless started her cult with it. I exposed them. They went dark. They came back. I exposed them again. They went dark. Who knows what they'll do next time. But this time, they really put their foot in it, because this time their primary teaching was a condemnation of Leah, my wife, doing exactly what this mashal says. And this time, they've done exactly what Paul did, as the wolf in sheep's clothing. They're wearing me like a skin, copying everything, projecting themselves as if they were me. Dode's not pleased with that. So he says, so the Choter, you speak out against the mouths and the pronouncements of these evil, stupidly stubborn and corrupt people. As for the meaning of Choter, well, it is a title, and therefore it should just be transliterated. When God uses titles, they all convey a meaning. Every one of the some 20 titles that he's ascribed to this mission that he has asked me to complete on behalf of his people has descriptive titles. Things like Kol, which is the voice of God. Bashar, which is the corporeal, physical, human herald of the king. Adama Parah, productive and bloody red man of the earth, who serves as the bull. Man out of Edom, a person who comes from this place where there was a split in the family of God, who, according to Yeshua, saves a great many. Man called a Nakar, an observant foreigner, named Yada, one who knows. This is the story that Yah was telling, even through Zeroah, one who cultivates the seeds for a productive harvest. It is so many of these descriptive titles, like Choter, Ed, Witness. And Choter is a rod of divine justice. Now, just a clue here for those sleuthing along with us and trying to glean as much as you can out of the evidence. It's a really stupid idea to attack the guy who Yahweh is assigning the responsibility. Oh, you can say, okay, Dode is assigning the responsibility. Well, Yahshua, it's Yahweh assigning the responsibility. Here, it's Dode. But since Dode's king, and he has been established in that role by God, I don't think there's really any difference in those two. But the person who has been given the responsibility of being the rod of divine judgment, he is not the guy you want to oppose. Now, maybe that's why they decided they would attack my wife. But how do you think I'm going to respond to that? The same way Yahweh responds when you attack his son, by the way. Or his bride, Yisrael. Exactly the same way. Matter of fact, Yahweh is more aggressive when you assault and attack Israel, as Muslims and Christians and progressives are going to find quite soon, than he is if you attack him. Yahweh is actually more defensive and supportive of his beloved son, Dode, than he is himself. And in this case, as Dode's herald, Dode is exceedingly protective of the work I am doing for him. And so he is laying it out just as Yashayah laid it out. To oppose him is a really stupid idea. And what is the opposite of stupid? Intelligent. Yeah, that would be it. And what is the opposite of opposing? Supporting. So wouldn't it be, by corollary, really intelligent to support the efforts of the Choter? Well, and while at it, not condemning his wife because he doesn't like that. I constantly tell the world when they show pictures of Gaza being obliterated, I said, it turns out Jews don't like it when you rape them, terrorize them, mutilate them, burn them alive, abduct them. They don't like it very much. So if you don't like the consequence of how they respond, just don't do those things. Same thing would be true when it comes to attacking and bitterly demeaning my wife. Oh, by the way, I did, just for giggles, since they based their denunciation of my wife on Zechariah 5. I completed my translation of it this morning and writing now the commentary of it. And boy, did they ever get that one wrong. But that is their propensity. So it's a Choter. It's a rod of divine justice. He is a stem off the main branch. Who is the main branch? The guy who wrote this ode to the Choter. The main branch is Dode. He is the branch off of the tree of lives. Not am I a branch off of the main branch, Dode, of the tree of lives, but my primary role at this time is to be the main branch of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I need you to know what's wrong and what's right, because unless you know what's wrong, you're not in a position to embrace what's right. They go hand in hand. And that's my primary job. And he's also a productive sucker from the fallen trunk. And that is essential because when you read what Yashaya would write about being firmly established and nurtured and grounded in the rootstock of Ishe, of one who stands out and noticed and therefore tied in with Dode in terms of paternity. You realize that it is the stump of Yisrael that God is talking about. When there are two olive trees, one on left and right side of that menorah, as we considered in the previous chapter of, in fact, the chapter we're currently reviewing of Zechariah, the 4th chapter, the olive tree that has represented Yisrael has fallen over. And it's just a stump left. And so the roots still have life. And so to make that tree productive and fruitful again, Parah, which is, by the way, one of the names of titles of the Choter, then a sucker needs to grow from it. And one of the things that's interesting, there are plants where suckers are considered non-productive. But when it comes to an olive, a sucker will bear fruit. And this says, Dode says, that this Choter will rise and he's going to roar. Well, until we started the Yahweh blog at Yahweh's insistence, I had neither risen nor roared. I had stayed nose down in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, and I had done a whole lot of writing. But I've risen. I'm looking up now. And I'm here to roar, which is why we're doing the Yahweh blog. And according to Dode, we're going to be successful. We're going to triumph. And in particular, in opposition to the numbskulls, to the religious, to the political, to the conspiratorial, to those who are traitors. And we're going to agitate them. I'm pretty good at that. And so the language, this is wa shafa, the lips, the language, the spoken words, also a product now of the Yahweh blog, of the one who learns, or has learned, but still learning, the wealth of knowledge that is in the books behind me, the 35, all free at yadayah.com. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Go to yadayah.com. You can read all of them for free. They average about 650 pages to 700 pages a piece, and there are 35 of them. A lot of material to process. And my job now is to take all that I have learned there and all of the connections I have made to understand, all of the insights that I have discerned from the Torah, the prophets, and the Mizmor, and to share them with you. The purpose of the Yahweh blog. And in doing so, my approach has to be the same as was Dode's, as was Yashaya's, as was Moshe's, as is Yahweh's. And what is that? They actually spend more time exposing and condemning religion than they do telling you the truth. And the reason for that until you understand that your religion, well, is as stupid as calling the dead man on a stick fully God. Until you understand how stupid, till you have an appreciation for the fact that the Quran is the most vile, deadly, demonic book ever written, and you can walk away from it and discard it, just as you walk away from the demon-possessed authorship of the Christian New Testament, and you get past the rabbinical scum who erased Yahweh's name and position themselves as authorities over God. Till you get past all that, you're not in a position to even process the truth. You're certainly not in a position to approach God. You can pray all you want. God doesn't give a damn. Never asks anyone to pray anyway. You can bow down all you want. That's fine for you too, but I can tell you that anybody that's bowing down to God doesn't know him, and he doesn't know them. You can worship all you want, but if you're doing that, then you're demeaning God, and he has no interest in you. God who doesn't want to be worshipped, wants to be known and respected and listened to, and for us to respond to what we hear him say, which we hear by reading the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms. But until you separate yourself from religion, as Adam and Sarah did when they left Babylon, as Moshe did when he left Mitzrayim, as Doe did when he left his father behind and went to Bethlehem to tend sheep, as I did, when I realized that there was no way to rationalize Christianity. There were too many unanswerable questions, too many conflicts. And I reasoned myself out of it after having been immersed in it up to my eyeballs. I just said, I can't continue this charade. It's obviously false. And so, there we are. That is where we are in this process, and it is the job of the Choter to use language and be symbolic of one who came to realize that everything I'm sharing with you has been there all the time, and that over 3,000 years, other than Yeshaya, Zechariah, and Malachi, Hosea, Yirmiah, no other individual in all of human history understood what was being conveyed. And so that's the way God wanted it. He not only wanted somebody to figure it out from what he had already stated, which means that you have no excuse. Somebody wrote me today, what about the people who really, really believed and a savior before you were communicating this message and they died? What's going to happen with them? My first response is, don't ever believe. Don't ever solicit the beliefs of others. Either know or don't know. And the very idea that this person wrote that when they're asking me, what is the fate of somebody who believes in something that's not true? If I believe that I can walk on water, it doesn't make it so. If I believe that I can grab hold of 1,000 volts and it's just going to make my hair stand out and be better looking, what do you think the result's going to be? If I believe I can put a gun to my head and pull the trigger and that God's going to spare me from being stupid, how do you think it's going to work out? If your belief is in something that is not true, then the value of your belief is in that thing that's not true. The answer is obvious. And you can't blame God. Can't blame me either. You can't be more devoted to learning and then sharing what I have learned than I have been. every waking hour for 24 years since I was called to this mission. I have no other life than this one. And you can't blame God. That's the whole point of this. It was always there. It's been there for 3,000 years. So you have no excuse. People just didn't take God seriously. Too busy praying and bowing and worshiping to bother actually considering what God said. All here. That's the beauty of it. If a goy, a man from Edom, can learn what is true and put all the pieces together to present the entire portrait for you, then there's no excuse. Anybody else could have done it, but no one else did. We only have ourselves to blame. He who learns and comes to understand and then teaches. What do you think this word is? What are we calling this series? Chakmah Choter? Chakmah Choter? Well, this is Chakmah. Chakmah is a verbal form of Chakmah, which is a noun. So we are in the process of the actionable aspect of Chakmah. Chakmah, wise. Chakam, to be, one who learns, who comes to understand, and then teaches, one who is intelligent, who is discerning in their thought process. So Dode here, and this is Mashal, word pictures, Proverbs 14:3. Dode presents the Choter rising up against the pronouncements of the stubbornly corrupt and those they beguile. His tool to be wielded against the ignorant and the irrational of this day, and particularly in opposition to unethical political and religious institutions, as well as the conspiratorial nutcases out there, is to be forthright, to share what he has learned, to shut them down. His style is to roar rather than whimper. A few shows ago, Leah said, "Oh, calm down a little bit. You're roaring." Of course I'm roaring. My job to roar. I'm a bull. You ever seen a demure bull? So it's a tool to be wielded against the ignorant, the irrational, to be deployed in opposition to the unethical, to literally roar, to rise to the occasion rather than shirk responsibility. The Choter is an agitator. He's not a conciliator. Doesn't do any conciliation. And in these ways, he triumphs magnificently according to his king because he doesn't compromise, because he is intolerant, because he's not trying to find allies among the political and the religious. The Lord knows that's the case, right? For sure as hell don't bond with the MAGAites, the regressive libertards, or the conspiratorialists which permeate social media sites like X. Oh, I'm there to agitate them. Also worth noting, when combating idiots, the Choter is more a rod of divine justice, whereas he becomes a productive branch when sharing what is learned. His fort will be the spoken word, affirming that Yahweh was serious about the transition here from writing to speaking. Dode and Yahweh were obviously on the same wavelength about this 3,000 years ago. I was just late to the party. And in this regard, before I would turn on the lights and look to the cameras, and before I would roar into this microphone and the others that we have in our various studios, I would first have to come to embody all of the knowledge that I had acquired along the way. I mean, today I think it can be safely said no one understands the Christian New Testament and its actors, Paul, Peter, Luke, Mark, better than I do, or the fraud that is Jesus. No one on earth understands the fraud that was perpetrated by Muhammad and Allah and the first Muslims, and how their dubious tale is woven into the revolting Quran and Hadith. I don't think there's anybody on the planet that's ever come to understand how the book of Ezekiel explains the scheme that is rabbinic Judaism and that it's false from beginning to end. And he edits that same individual who has written vociferously about Yahweh and what is true about him, and about his love for and our devotion to his beloved son, Dowd. Writing these books based upon amplified translations derived from the oldest extant sources in the Dead Seas, all so that you might know and understand. It's a very unusual resume, isn't it? A resume no one in all of human history shares. There's only one Choter. And now we know why. In Dowd's Mashal word picture, we see the Choter following in the footsteps of the prophets who have enlightened him, because he is as devoted to exposing and condemning what is wrong as he is to revealing and affirming what is correct. That is one of the great mysteries of Christianity and Judaism, even to some extent Islam. They all claim that the Torah, prophets, and Psalms were inspired by their gods, and yet the primary theme in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms is goddamn religion. God hates the stuff, and yet they're all religious. How can you claim that books that expose and condemn religion and do so without compromise were inspired by your God if you're out promoting a religion? Think, people. It says that what the Choter is devoted to exposing and condemning is indeed wrong, as is the fact that what he is revealing and affirming is correct. But of course, he will be excoriated for this by those who are rational, that he, in fact, excoriates. And that he will do so now in social media, which is where you have the broadest voice, where your voice is amplified. Going to be fruitful in bringing God's people home. Therefore, the Choter is to oppose the ignorant and irrational, just as I'm doing today. His weapons, well, are words that are wisely wielded, Chakmah words, Chakmah words. And in this way, Dowd leads us right back to Chakmah, the primary attribute that would set the Choter apart from all others. He has the wisdom, the intellect, to deduce insights that no one has ever seen before, and to lay them out for you so that you might not only understand, but enjoy the process of coming to know and respect Yahweh. It, of course, is what makes the Choter distinct. Reinforcing Yada's Nakar, observant foreigner depiction, Dowd reveals that this Choter is especially observant. Now, I was largely unaware of my role as the LF, productive bull, prior to it being explained by Yashaya in conjunction with Teruah. And it was there that I read about the role the Parah plays as it, in conjunction really with the second half of Teruah. The first half of Teruah is a gleaning of olives from this olive tree that becomes productive, the olive that's on one side of the menorah. It is gleaning of those olives. But the second half of Teruah, to the backdrop of a solar eclipse on the Shabbat, the Saturday of September 24th, is about me as a Aleph, as a Par, as a Parah, which is just a productive bull, making it possible for the surviving remnant of Yisrael to live. That's the purpose of the Adamah Parah. And Yahweh, turns out, has lots of terms for bull, par, para. Aleph is one of them. We're going to even hear a fourth in this pronouncement. Dod's vocabulary was rife with these words as well. He knew them. And each of them has a slightly different shading because God uses titles to explain the purpose of those he's deploying as implements. And just as Dod is the Lion of Judah, the big roar and ferocious and against opponents, and he will protect those who are with him, and he will intimidate those who would harm them. Dod is the magnificent Lion of Judah, but he's also the Passover lamb. In my case, just as it is the case with most of Yahweh's players, I have an animal that I'm associated with. It's the bull. I am a bull. Stamping out all manner of snakes, and serpents, and demons. I'm aggressive. I got big horns. And bulls are protective, particularly of the bovines and their care, under their stewardship, just as lions are protective of lionesses. Well, Aleph is a learned and productive bull. But Aleph is actually the Hebrew word also for 1,000-fold, to increase 1,000-fold. So he's saying without the Aleph, this learned and productive bull who increases 1,000-fold by this magnitude, an abundantly prolific and industrious bovine from Aleph, to learn, to become familiar with the lesson such that the student actually owns the material and can teach it without hesitation or equivocation when prompted. Pretty powerful term, isn't it? And by the way, it's a term that Yahweh uses in the second of the three statements he wrote on the first of the two tablets, where he tells us that those who are closely examine and carefully consider the terms and conditions of the covenant, that there will be thousands of them who receive Yahweh's mercy, compassion, love, and adoration. Thousands amongst billions. Well, the Aleph is the tool to that in the end. He's a learned and productive bull who increases 1,000-fold. Listen to this. I'm going to say something that my beloved fact checker, who I dearly, dearly love and respect, Mike, he's doesn't like me to say these words. What I'm going to share with you now is something he's asked me to remove from my translation, even though both of these words are the primary meaning of Ibush, because they have been usurped by Christianity to create their Christmas carols. And, well, now we know where they got their material. But because Christians have pilfered the things of God, means that rather than us negating the things that they've stolen, pretending that they don't exist, giving them to them, as Jews did when they didn't defend the fact that Dode is the Son of God and the Messiah and our Savior, when they had all evidence that says this is true, they went ahead and let Christians steal that from them. Well, I'm not of that mindset, so I'm going to tell you exactly what these words mean, and we're going to have to ponder the implications because, well, folks, they're profound. I read them, and it took me a while just to process it, because this provides far more credit to and responsibility to the Choter than anything I ever signed up for. But nonetheless, I made a commitment that I would go where the words lead, regardless of what they have to say. Dode is speaking of the Choter, and he says, without the Aleph, this learned and productive bull, who increases 1,000-fold, the manger and the crib are empty. Without the Choter acting as the Aleph, learned and productive bull, who increases 1,000-fold, who is abundantly prolific and industrious, who learns, becoming so familiar with the lesson that he owns the material to the point that he can teach it without hesitation. Without him, the manger and the crib, where the flock would live and be nourished, where the children of the covenant would be born and protected, would be empty. Now, that's a lot of responsibility for a person. Now, of course, the Choter is given, as we now know, the seven spirits of Yahweh to make this happen. He has the endorsement of the King of Kings going for him. And God is the responsible party that's going to make this so. But nonetheless, God works through people, and through this Choter, through this learned and productive bull, who increases 1,000-fold, the manger has sheep. The crib has children. And without him, they don't. Think of that. I mean, the responsibility of that. And then put it in the perspective of what we know. According to Yahweh, and the evidence is clear, from 3000 BCE, when Dode wrote these words, for example, when he explained in first person that he was going to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, that he said, I am going to be that guy that is crucified, that I'm going to be the one who takes your guilt into Sheol to deposit it there so that you're perfected, and then I'm going to be the firstborn of firstborn children. When he wrote about that, and we find in all of his Mizmor that he's constantly talking about his role that he has volunteered to fulfill. And we come upon Yahweh's name, and we come upon the terms and conditions of the covenant, and we come upon the purpose and the meaning of each of the 7 Moed Mikre and what they contribute to us, and when they have been fulfilled and will be fulfilled, and by whom. That none of that was known from the time that of the last prophet 2,500 years ago to the time that Yahweh asked me to perform in this way. No one. God said, I looked for someone. I never found anyone who would listen to me. Not a single soul knew any of this. And then, wham. Yahweh says, you're my guy. I'm going to make it possible for you to know this. And once you know it, you're going to share it with my people. You're going to write it down and then speak it out. And if that did not occur, there wouldn't be a single member of the covenant family. There would be no Shabuah harvest. There would be no Teruah gleaning. There would be no adulterous woman that is perfected so that she can be betrothed to her returning king and Messiah Dode. There would be no one that knew Yahweh's name. You can't even imagine the possibility that after 3,000 years of nothing, that all of a sudden, all of this suddenly becomes known and accepted without this intervention, because this is the only place that it has been introduced to you. And all of that time. So I know exactly, and so should you, exactly what God has done through this choter, this rod of divine judgment, this stem off the main branch of the tree of lives, this sucker that gives the rootstock new life, this stem off the tree of knowledge and good and evil, this learned and productive bull. We should all know exactly what he has achieved because it was all written down in the prophets. And the result is we will have a Shabuah harvest. The result is there will be a Teruah ingathering. The result is the adulterous woman will be prepared to be betrothed to her returning king, Dowd. And that there are people who are embracing the truth that Dowd is the Messiah, the Son of God, and our Savior, not that counterfeit and misnomer. This is the reason. While the manger isn't empty, God is calling his flock home, and they know where, how, and when, even why to return. And there will be children of Yisrael again. The crib will not be empty. That's just half of Mashal Word Pictures 14:4. The other half reads, and yet a large, great, productive, and abundant harvest will be derived and produced by the authority and capability, the empowerment and the effort of this shore observant bull, of the thoughtful and responsive bull on this journey, who possesses what he sees, to processes what he sees, to comprehend, and then cares enough to help others perceive the same. So, a great and productive, an abundant, a widespread and plentiful, a rob, an impressive harvest will be derived and produced, tabuah, yielded and gained, of great value by the authority and capability, the empowerment and the effort, the koach, through the qualifications and the resources of this shore, of this observant bull, of the thoughtful and responsive bull, on this journey, who possesses, processes what he sees to comprehend and cares enough for everyone else to share it freely and openly. That and the previous statement that I've shared with you today were written by the most brilliant man who ever lived, the most articulate man who ever lived, the one man chosen by God above all others, the man whom Yahweh calls his beloved son, his firstborn, by the man that Yahweh anointed not once but 3 times as our Messiah, the man who Yahweh says, I have prepared his seat of honor and his throne for all time, the king who is returning, the man who has lived 2 lives already and will live a third, the ultimate shepherd, the exemplar of his people, the great defender, wrote these words about a man. Now you have some idea as to why Dowd introduced this mashal about this man, what this man would achieve. Now, he's not working on his own. We read in Yashayah, he's got the 7 spirits of Yah, and The most important of them is Chakmah. Got to have the Chakmah to be a Choter, to be the Choter. This is not an addition. He has no rivals. There isn't a second. It's like when Yahweh told Miriam, "You're an idiot. I speak through Moshe. And at this time, I'm not speaking through anybody else. And I'm so disgusted that you would claim that you also speak for God. If your father spit in your face, even if he did so, I would discard you, cover you in leprosy and shame." This is a big deal. It's when a big deal is when the single most important person in the history of humankind says that without this fellow, this Choter, this rod of divine judgment, this stem of life, filled with Chakmah, wisdom, who exposes and condemns all of the evil of this world, without him, and without this man being a learned and productive bull who increases 1,000-fold, there's no sheep in the manger. There's no children in the crib. It's all for naught. And so, as a result, a great, a productive, an abundant, a widespread and plentiful, even impressive harvest is going to be derived and produced, tabuah, yielded and gained of great value by the authority and capability, the empowerment and the effort of this shore, this observant bull, this thoughtful and responsive individual on this journey who possesses and processes what he sees, what he observes to comprehend, and then is compassionate and caring enough to share what he has learned. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is as remarkable, wonderful, intimidating as anything we'll ever read. And it is also insightful because guess what? The man whom Dode used two terms to describe him as a bull, Eleph and Shor. Well, he is the same fellow that Moshe referred to as the Adam of Parah, this bloody red man of the earth who is a productive bull. All the same. Adam of Parah, Shor, as well as Eleph. He's also the Zeroah and the one responsible for cultivating the Shabuah and Teruah harvests. And here we find Dode affirming that this bull will be exceedingly prolific, producing a harvest that is 1,000-fold what would have occurred otherwise. In fact, the math is not just 1,000. It's a very great number because you can't have 1,000-fold none. Now, it's not totally true because Dode has already been one. And so 1,000 times one would be 1,000. And we can be assured that Abraham and Sarah and Yishak, Jacob, Leah is certainly there. And Noach and his sons and his wife's sons would certainly be there. Shamuel is certainly there. Koleb, Yahusha ben Nun, Moshe's successor, would be there. Of course, Moshe, if I haven't already mentioned him, obvious. Deborah, yeah, absolutely. And so when we look at the people who stayed the course, Ruth, who listened, who responded, who did and said the right things all the way through the process. It's that number that is being increased 1,000-fold. Very encouraging, isn't it? Yeshaya, of course, is in this company. Yirmiah, Hosea, Zechariah, Malachi, Yoel. They're all in this company. Further, the Choter is doing what I have done, which is to allow to learn, becoming so familiar with the instructions that God has conveyed to us that he comes to own the material, which is why at this point Yahweh said in mid-December, enough, you've written enough. One more book is going to have very little incremental benefit. I want you to start speaking to my people. Now, he didn't tell me to stop writing. Matter of fact, what I'm sharing with you now is something that I have written for the final book that I will publish, Coming Home 4. It's called Bashar Herald. It comes from that book. I would love to be able to share this as a PDF, which maintains the formatting in our Facebook family, but Facebook doesn't allow PDFs, and everything that you post there loses its formatting. So it's a little bit challenging to do this. It's a 45-page analysis of the 14th Mashal. So I'm still writing. I spent all day yesterday translating and commenting on, as it turns out, Zechariah 5, and I will spend most of today completing it. But my primary mission now, according to Yahweh and Dode, is to speak to you, to becoming the audible roar of the Choter. So in these words, the Son of God was inspired to reveal that without our collaboration, the crib containing the children of Israel would be empty. There would be no remnant. That is to say, there would be no Shabuah or Teruah harvest either, and no family homecoming on Yom Kippurim without the Choter, this bull of Yahweh. This mashal was written for the Choter because without the Choter, there would be no kingdom of Dode. As big deals go, this rivals the most important in the human experience. Now, doesn't change the fact that the Choter is the lesser luminary that reflects the sun's light. And in that regard, making the kingdom of Dode possible is one thing. Doesn't change the fact that it's the kingdom of Dode. And I can tell you for certain, I'm not jealous. As a matter of fact, if I could back down 1,000,000 notches such that there wasn't this much responsibility in serving my king and our God, our king and our God, I'd gladly do so. I'd gladly go back to anonymity. But that is not God's intent, and I'm going to honor their intent. So I'm going to continue to roar. Now, recognizing that King Dode just stated that without the bull who serves as the Choter, the covenant's crib would be barren. We must not overly credit the Messiah's herald. Yeah, those are big pants to wear. That's a tall order to fill. However, apart from what Yahweh does with him and through him, enables for him, Yahweh is just a man. flawed and as inadequate as all other men. But God does his best work through flawed implements. Look at Daud. Look at Moshe. And yet, even though Yahweh does his best work with the likes of the Choter, in the Choter's case, God gave me every advantage. I would have to be an ignoramus to screw this up. So long as I'm willing to devote the time, so long as I stay focused, so long as my brain continues to function as it does, and I remain reasonably articulate, so long as the processor continues to work, then with the benefit of the 7 Ruach of Yahweh and of Chakmah being the first of the special capabilities that are being provided by the Spirit of Yahweh, it is by working together that we will produce Rab, Tebuah, an abundant harvest, both widespread and plentiful, even a harvest of great value. In this regard, Daud, of course, is speaking of the Moedim, the restoring witnesses to the promise of the Shabuah, 7 Shabbat, harvest, and the Yom Teruah, day of the herald, and all that will happen on these days. Therefore, we are reminded that the Choter is operating on Yahweh's schedule, on his authority. He's empowered and enabled by Yahweh's Spirit. And that notwithstanding that Yah is the bull, and he is going to be industrious, and he's going to invest the effort to prevail. And since the evil woman that was depicted here has turned the Ruach into mommy God, let me remind you that when Yashayah was inspired to write of this Choter, to write the textbook on proper chotering, he made it very clear that the Choter would be empowered, enabled with the 7 spirits of Yahweh. And I can tell you, this bull ain't no woman. And he isn't God. And so if 7 spirits of Yahweh, 7 Ruach of Yahweh don't make one mom, then I can tell you one doesn't make a mom either. God is our Father. He is not our mother. Now, making sure we wouldn't miss the connection between Adamah Parah and Eleph, this learned and productive bull who increases 1,000-fold. Our king speaks also of a shore, of an observant bull who is thoughtful and responsive, one who loves to learn and then to share and teach. He knew these things because Daud was a prophet, and he saw the events as foretold by Yashayah and Zechariah in advance of the others. The primary purpose of the Choter is to serve. And we will pick up this story in our next episode of Chakmah Choter. I thank you for listening. I am the Choter, speaking for Yahweh on behalf of our King, Daud. Thank you for listening.